sitting down and just talking
Yeah.
about labor union problems.
Yeah.
It was all because he came home and he talked about it at dinner time, or something else, I can't remember. It was just part of your life. It was
Yeah.
just, do you have children?
Yes, too.
When you go home, I don't know your public service, but still, you talked about things that went on at the Capitol that day, and the children just happened to hear it.
Yeah.
So it's sitting there in the back of your mind, but you're not telling them what went on. It was just part of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, did he, now, we've gotten into a little bit of what you remember directly, but do you remember D.K. Stivers?
Yes.
What was he like to you?
Gray-haired Southern gentleman. That's all I can ever think of him, as being a tall, austere, and for some reason or other, it impressed me that he was a Southern gentleman.
Was he quiet?
Not that it wasn't that kind of association. He was Gay's father. I'd be down there playing with her. Oh, he didn't make too much racket. He'd sit in his chair. He smoked cigars, which smelled terrible. It's just a child's, where you could go. You could go on their sun porch.
Did you ever go out to Pipestone Hot Springs?
I know I was out there, but I don't know why, other than maybe go swimming.
Yeah. Well, were there any incidents that, you mentioned the tear gas incident, were there any incidents that affected you during some of the strikes or the labor unrest?
Oh yeah, oh yes.
What can you remember?
One night, sleeping in there, and when you had construction, they used to have these little metal balls full of gasoline or kerosene that they lit them on fire. Somebody threw it right through that window, right at the foot of my bed. But my dad was home at that time.
What happened when it came into the house? Did it catch anything on fire?
Thank heaven, it blew out, and all we had was oil all over the floor. But that's what it,
What did your dad do when that happened?
Well, he certainly went outside to look around. Then they cleaned it up. But then during that strike, the word got around that there might be a kidnapping. And again, would be Ned, Chuck, and I. Chuck was 15. I was 5. And Ned was 6 years older. But at any rate, they took over the Elkhorn Resort down, I can't say resort, it was a bunch of cabins down in Elkhorn, down north of Dillon. Now my brothers went by one car, and my mother's mother, Nellie Sullivan, and I, and some gunmen, went in another car, and we went down to Elkhorn. And I don't know, there must have been 6 or 8 men, Bert Foster, Bedell, a couple of the men we knew real well, a couple we didn't. And there's a picture in there, Ned drew a pen and ink drawing. That night, my brother Chuck heard this scratching at the screen. And he started yelling, "Help, help, they found us." And of course there's shots flying all over the place. My grandmother and I are under one bed, and Ned or Chuck are under another bed. We get up in the morning, and there is this poor porcupine, and that thing is smashed to smithereens. It is blown apart. But that's the fear.
So you were guarded down there?
Oh yes, yes.
How long were you down there? Do you
A
remember?
couple of weeks, or a week maybe.
Did you find that when the attitude of the other kids towards you for being the gunman's daughter?
Oh yes, very much so.
What did you experience?
I picked and chose my friends, and I was very sure of who my friends were. They would be very snide. They'd be very cruel in their speech.
Hurtful?
Hurtful. Very much so. I think my brothers did too. My oldest brother was he was kind of like my mom. She was kind of soft, you know what I mean? Ned, it was tough on him because Ned was a very gregarious person, and he didn't like to be picked on. But I noticed it. I noticed girls could be very, very cruel. Very, very cruel. Now, Marion was a good friend of mine and her father was a shift boss.
That's Marion Hansel?
Marion Hansel.
Do you remember an incident that they had in their family during one
In
of
the
the strikes?
46 strike, their house up here at 1137 West Silver. They stripped everything out of that house, including the drapes, the curtains, everything.
Who did that?
Her brothers, because her husband, this would be Mrs. Hansel, her brothers, Pete Lavelle and Fleming, they came down, took all the furniture out, and there was nothing left in the house, nothing, except the refrigerator. They couldn't get the refrigerator out. And so that night we got word that a mob was on the way to that house. And so I called my dad, and he just said to go on up and get Mrs. Hansel and the baby and bring them on down here. Which I did, and Mrs. Hansel only brought a bag of old dirty socks for the babies.
Now, why were they in danger? Perceived?
Because Mr. Hansel, Ted Hansel, who was known as Haile Selassie on the hill, because he was he really dark black hair, handsome. And everybody called him Haile Selassie. And he passed away in Seattle here about 8 or 10 years ago. But he was a shift boss at the Orphan Building. Or down, no, not in Silver. Well, at any rate, he was a shift boss, and he was behind the fence, per se. And they felt he was a scab. They were going to do his house in.
And did they do his house in?
No, they were stopped on Excel Park.
And how did that happen?
About 200 men. That was a combined effort of the local police and a few company men.
Was your dad involved in that?
He was. He stopped. He saw that it was stopped.
Now, did you have people protecting you in this house?
Yes, there was a man that was kept down in here. There's a little apartment house down across the street. He had the basement apart. His name was Mr. It wasn't Esty. It was. Oh, I'll think of it.
His job was to protect your family?
Yeah. I don't know what he could protect, to be honest with you. He was an older man. Now, I have to say something too on the men that worked for my dad. They were married, but they didn't have children.
Was that a policy of the company?
It was a policy of his. He did not want them to have anything that any other children would be endangered. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's all they would think about is their job. Maybe they'd be married, yes, but a lot of them were single, and he did bring a lot of them out from Chicago, Illinois, during Prohibition.
Did he interview them out there and bring them here?
He went back there and brought quite a few out.
Oh, how many men would he have working for him at one time?
40, 50.
And what kind of jobs would they have normally, just as the security? Or?
Mm-hmm. Perimeter.
Did he ever talk about, or do you remember the searchlights on the hill?
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about that?
Well, they were all, you'd have to almost say, armed camp, searchlights for perimeter.
In the 30s, or?
Yes, back into the 20s also, as much as they could. Lighting was always a problem. Because, as I said before, security was a big problem here. I mean, there wasn't anything worse than, you had a bunch of downtrodden people coming over from Europe, and they were here, and if this town went down again, you've got another chaotic confusion. There'd be no jobs. Security was a problem. And
So,
you always had people that were off their rocker anyway.
well, did you back on the searchlights? Did your dad talk about them, or did they have a name? Or
Not that I know of.
Would his men run the searchlights?
Well, there's a watchman. The watchman at all the gates. You'd have watchmen at all the gates. I I can't say that the searchlights went like this as they do in a prison. Because I did not live up around the lights. I have always